Welcome to the Unknown Webcast. It is I, the conservative one, and I am really so conservative that I can't turn left even when I'm driving, which surprises some people since I used to drive a truck. They decided that it's true, as they have met me, and that means that this is not a safe space for those who are easily offended by having their ideas challenged. This is broadcast number 111. And this week, Bob Pardon is back with us to discuss questions about recovering from spiritual abuse. My name is Don Vino, and I'm president of Midwest Christian Outreach, Inc. in Wonder Lake, Illinois, which produces the Unknown Webcast. And our senior researcher is Ron Hensel, who will introduce today's sponsors.
Yes, greetings from sunny Florida, where the palm tree came out, saw a shadow, and now we have 12 more months of summer again. Our sponsor, 12, yes, our sponsor this afternoon or in the morning, depending on where you are, or at night, who knows, is World's End Theology Outlet, your one-stop resource for half-baked heresies, dubious doctrines, and other ideas whose time has gone. World's End Theology Outlet. And to ensure continued access to this program, please go to midwestoutreach.org. If you like it, or if you don't, if you just want to annoy others with it, just click on that yellow donate button and contribute as you feel led. This will help keep us bringing this content to you, whoever and wherever you are. So,
and we have Bob Pardon, and I want to, if I can get this back up on our there we go, on our screen again, and make it advance one. Can I advance this? Do I know how to do that?
I don't know.
Oops. Oh, how about that? How about that? Ta-da!
Ta-da!
Hey, I'm impressed.
You got to put it on show, present to everyone so that it doesn't
present to everyone so it stays there even when I'm talking.
Yes.
Because Bob Pardon and his organization Meadow Haven is co-sponsoring Recovering from Spiritual Abuse, a conference for survivors, churches, and helpers. And that will be when and where?
That'll be in Hartford, Connecticut at the Doubletree Hotel at the airport, actually, the Bradley International Airport. And it is on October 26th and 27th.
Now, sometimes we need to define our terms. I didn't know it was possible to be spiritual while you were abusing people. But, I have a feeling that most people are not going to confuse the term spiritual abuse with like good abuse or, abuse that can be committed in God's name for good cause.
Right.
We all pretty much know that we're talking about something that's pretty bad, something that people take a long time to recover from, and we want to talk about recovering from it.
We do, and we tend to think of it in terms of cults only, but as Ron and I are aware, and Bob is aware, this can occur in what we might consider theologically orthodox churches.
Yes.
They could behave in sort of cultic ways or spiritually abusive ways, which Ron, and this will lead into something that Ron has sort of ready. Dr. Ronald Enroth had written a book titled, oddly enough, Recovering. Was it? Which book are you?
Oh, well, he did two, Churches that Abuse.
Churches that Abuse. That's the one we want. He wrote Churches that Abuse and then Recovering from Churches that Abuse. But Churches that Abuse, he has a kind of an outline, and let's look at that, and then we'll see if Bob agrees.
Yeah. Okay, well, yeah, we can take them one by one then. He had 6 basic features of abusive churches. So I don't know how many times he used the phrase spiritual abuse, but it meant the same thing. The first one was authority and power. This is from his table of contents. And he says abusive churches misuse spiritual authority.
Absolutely.
So that's you're going to say that's a legitimate characteristic of spiritual abuse as well. Manipulation and control. Abusive churches use fear, guilt, and threats.
Yes.
You see that a lot. Yeah, I've seen it too. Elitism and persecution. Abusive churches see themselves as special.
Yes, we often call it, the elitism.
Yeah, it's a big factor. We're like the only ones doing this. I heard that a lot in the group I was in.
Mm.
Lifestyle and experience. Abusive churches foster rigidity.
Yes.
So there's one way of doing it. It's our way or the highway. And the funny thing is, in my group, they would talk about, well, you're perfectly free here. We're not coercing you in any way, but just try to color outside the lines every once in a while and see what it got you. Dissent and discipline. Abusive churches discourage questions.
Yes.
I mean, it's already difficult to put yourself out there and ask questions that might be disapproved by the group. But once you know that, okay, this kind of questioning isn't tolerated, it becomes, the pressure kind of builds up inside of you while you're going through it. And then exit and adjustment. And I would say, of all the things on this list, this is one of the most hurtful. Abusive churches make leaving painful. For me, that was extremely difficult. It's hard to leave. You're not free to leave. If you do leave, you will experience very negative consequences.
Yeah, Steve Hassan calls that traumatic departure. Okay. Or we call that traumatic departure, actually. But I think it's important to mention that the criteria that Ron Enroth had up there, we need to see this on a continuum. Mm-hmm. So it's not that all churches that are abusive are going to have these things to the max.
Right.
So you can have some that might be very heavy-handed in 1, 3, 5, and not too heavy-handed in 2 and 4. But they are going to manifest all abusive churches are going to be manifesting these kinds of things. I was talking with a guy the other day that I've been counseling who came out of a group called Church of the End Times. And it was started by an individual who had he had some kind of an auto business, and he had a call from God and was preaching the gospel and led people to Christ. And what this fellow was really struggling with as I met with him was that he didn't understand how God could use such a situation that was so abusive, fitting all of Enroth's criteria there. And one of the things I think that we've seen at Meadowhaven over the years is that God always honors his word. And even if it is in a bad environment, if the word is there, people can come to Christ. Now they get ground up in the process, but I think we as believers need to understand that simply because God honors his word, when the gospel goes out, that doesn't mean that the vehicle whereby it has come is healthy and good in every aspect.
Mm. You know, I think Dr. Enroth would definitely acknowledge what you just said. There's a spectrum. And this especially comes out in his book, Recovering from Churches That Abuse, because he's looking at experiences of people who recovered, and we're going through different kinds of recovering from different kinds of groups. And he acknowledges that, some of these groups were really well-intended and they just went off the track somewhere. And as you read some of the chapters, you realize that this group, wow, it was difficult. There was definitely a level of abuse there. But when you compared it to other groups, it wasn't nearly as bad. And yet they still needed recovery. They still needed to get over these things. And then another thing about the sequel, which ironically was more controversial than the original book because it actually named a well-known Christian group. But one of the things, when you lay those two tables of contents next to each other, in the Churches That Abuse book, there's specific criteria laid out. This is how you can identify these groups. And we just went over that. Right. But in the Recovering book, it's like there is no pattern that everybody follows. There's no, it seems that there's variety in what people go through to come out of the dark tunnel that they're going through. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. It really, I mean, over the years, as we've met with so many different individuals from around the world in regards to this, it depends upon how set up they were, so to speak, by their early experiences in life, the family that they came out of when they joined the group. It depends upon whether they were a Christian or a non-Christian when they joined. It is often dependent upon the personality type of the individual. So there's a lot of factors that go into play that can impact an individual more than others.
Yeah, the personality type is an important one for me. I talk about that one a lot, because if you have to change who you are at a fundamental level to fit into the group, then when you leave, there's a big question about, who am I? How do I even make decisions anymore? If you don't have to change very much to fit in well with the group, then leaving is not nearly as traumatic. If you're, for example, if you are like me, kind of outgoing, gregarious, that kind of extrovert, an extrovert would be the word, to fit into a group like the International Churches of Christ would not be difficult for me. Because they're high demand out there doing evangelism. But if you are an introvert and you are pretty shy, you have to make major changes to fit into the group, right? So,
yeah, absolutely. In fact,
so leaving is real traumatic.
Yeah, it definitely can be. We've had a couple of people at Meadowhaven who were diagnosed as they were high functioning autism, Asperger's autism, and they had gotten involved in communal groups. And in coming out, what was kind of interesting, and this is just anecdotal, there's no real research that's been done on this, but they did a little bit better getting out when they got out of the group than the average individual that we've dealt with, who struggles a lot over a period of time. And I've come to believe that part of it is because they, in their simplicity, did not really integrate into the group in a way that was just what you were talking about, Don, where it really grabbed their cores. Now, they were damaged by it and struggled afterwards, but it was almost like there was somewhat of a protection having the Asperger's.
So, like, this is, let's talk about that. This is one of the things I struggled with. I really felt like I had developed a closeness and a bond with the people that I was in my group with. And within, like, almost overnight, I left, and there was really no way to maintain a good relationship with them anymore. And when I did meet them, eventually they shunned me.
Right. Very normal.
Yeah. So,
I've tried shunning him, but Joy doesn't let me. So,
yeah. But that's for good reason, Don. This was not for.
Okay.
So, what are some of the various ways that you've seen people successfully deal with that, the pain of that, and what they have to go through? And maybe you could talk about some ways that people haven't. I mean, some of the ways that people have reacted in less constructive ways.
Okay, you mean the individual that left and was really cut off.
Right.
Shunned in that. Yeah. At Meadowhaven, our experience was that generally. Now, again, we dealt with the worst of the worst. We were dealing with individuals who had been very severely damaged, often physically abused, sexually abused, certainly spiritually and emotionally and psychologically abused as well. So some of them, and it just depended upon the individual and where they were at in the healing process, but some of them, to try and reconnect with family or with individuals who were in the group or individuals who were out of the group, was just too toxic for them. They just could not do it in a healthy way. And what worked best for them was to cut everyone off that had any kind of impact upon them in a negative way that they wanted to try and reconnect with. They just really needed to do that. Other individuals who have come out of a destructive group and have been kicked out, a lot of times, Ron, their family, who maybe was never in the group, doesn't understand why, and why they got involved in it, and why they did such things in the name of God to others that were around them. And it's very difficult for them to reconnect with family at times as well, because family doesn't trust them.
Right.
And many of them have to deal with a tremendous amount of guilt and shame that comes as a consequence of that. But it really depends upon the individual as to how they are able to reintegrate back into society. Because trauma, when you've been traumatized from our perspective this heavily, you have been disconnected from God, hence the spiritual abuse. You get disconnected from others because you can't trust them now at this point, because who knows what's going to happen if I have this level of trust again, and you get disconnected from your own self. I don't know how to trust others because look what happened when I did it this time. So there's a real struggle for individuals when they come out to try and integrate back into society, and you've got to rebuild all three of those areas in their lives.
So let's go over those again. Trust of the...
They're disconnected from their self, they're disconnected from God, they're disconnected from others.
Self, God, and others.
Yes.
How could I have done such a thing? You know, how could I have made such a poor decision? Why did God let this happen?
Right.
And who do I trust again?
Yes, exactly. That's a good way to put it.
And some of that is then reinforced. Let's say they come out and they start to try to integrate into a church. Okay, this is bad. I need to go someplace to be healed. The church may be the place to do that. And as they try to integrate into the church, they are met with things like people saying, "You are a Jehovah's Witness? You look smarter than that." Like somehow intelligence prevents being brought into a cult.
Right.
Or trying to approach pastors with some of these very difficult questions. Pastors who are ill-equipped for it, kind of push you away in some ways, and now you don't know where to go. So a lot of what I deal with, because we're not a residence program like you are, is emails. A lot of emails, mostly because people are afraid even to talk on the phone.
Yes.
So they'll email and they'll go, okay, you know, I know I shouldn't have to ask this question, but and I tell them, we encourage, ask questions, ask every question that comes to your mind.
Right.
Don't feel bad about it. Don't be embarrassed about it. Just send it to us. If you don't even want me to know what your name is, get a different email address. I will try to answer every question.
Yeah. So one thing that's a little ironic is what you prescribe for people who are trying to get over the cult experience is pretty much the same as what the cult prescribes for the new member. You got to cut off those old contacts. Now, so it sounds like, well, wait a minute, isn't that what cults do? Are we not just bringing a person into a new cult? Did you ever have any? Now, I'm not saying that that's what you're doing, because, frankly, you're right. Those connections in that cult were toxic, and I've seen people go back to the cult.
Right.
They'll go back and they'll get burned again.
Yes.
And they'll come back out again. And in other cases, they know they can't go back, but they make those toxic contacts anyways, and then they just get hurt again. They just get stomped on, and all those kinds of things. So it's so as I see it, the difference is the reason the cult told you to cut off is because those people are evil. The cult tells you to cut off with your family, with your friends, with your former teachers. Because they're evil. There's something desperately. I mean, they're just not following God. Whereas what we're saying is, those people are misled. They mean very well. It's kind of hard to tell the difference sometimes. But it's by your fruit. By their fruit you shall know them. And what was the fruit in your life? And what do you know they're going to do if you go back and talk to them? I was one of those who tried to go back and talk to my leader. Yep. I tried to talk to, reason with him, and I just got hurt again.
Yeah, so, absolutely.
Well, Paul tells Timothy, it's interesting, Paul tells Timothy that in the latter times, men will wax worse and worse. They will go on deceiving and being deceived. And so you have oftentimes those who are deceived who are deceiving others. And so your point, Ron, is a good one. It may be a good person who's just deceived, or Bob has mentioned that as well. We're not saying that everyone who does these kinds of things are intentionally harming. Sometimes they are unintentionally doing great damage. Yes. But the key is they're doing great damage.
Yeah, and I think, Don, earlier what you were saying about people trying to find some kind of safe haven in a church can be very problematic. We've had individuals. I remember one guy that came out of the Boston International Churches of Christ and told us that he went to a church, an evangelical church, and at the coffee hour, a woman came up and asked him, well, where did you come from? Because he was new. And he said, well, I have come from the International Churches of Christ. And she said, well, you can't be a Christian.
You're kidding.
He never went back again at that point. So, and it's hard for us, it's hard for Judy and I to, when in working with individuals who want to begin to really try and put their spiritual life back again, i.e. to go to a church or meet in a Bible study or something, it's very difficult to find churches, Bible-believing churches, that are sensitive to these kinds of issues, because frequently the pastor has had no training in this arena at all, and it's a matter of theology. If you just get your theology straightened around, if you just pray a little bit more, you'll be fine. And it doesn't work like that with really severe trauma.
It doesn't. I have had over the years the opportunity that when someone calls trying to find a church or they want to go someplace, they're afraid, obviously, as we've talked about. I'll have them give me a list of churches in the area that they think might be interesting to try, and then I call the pastors, and very often the response I get is, "I don't think we're equipped for that. Please don't send them here." I do get that.
How sad.
Well, but I respect that, because that
I
tells
do too.
me that on the other spectrum, I get pastors going, "Just send them to me. Don't worry about it. I'll take care of it." That is definitely not a place I'm going to send them to.
Yeah.
What I really like are the ones who go, "I'm not sure we're equipped for this, but I'm willing to try," at which point I'll have them get Janis Hutchinson's book, Out of the Carson into the Church, because it's a very helpful resource for them, and have had good success then kind of integrating these people into those kinds of environments, because the pastor going, "What I don't know, I'm willing to learn. I want to serve." And I want to send them to a place where the pastor wants to be a servant instead of the boss.
Yeah, I have 2 master's level theological degrees. In neither one of the seminaries that I went to, nor do I know of any seminary that teaches a full course on cults. You'll usually get something as part of maybe a theology course or an ethics course or church history or something like that, but nothing that's geared towards pastoral issues and cults, which is really, really sad. So Trinity Evangelical Divinity School, Gordon Conwell, Fuller, Southwestern Baptist, none of them have anything that deals with cults.
So, by the way, that book by Janis Hutchinson is available on Kindle for like $3. So,
right.
Great book.
How important is it to the long term? I realize in the short term it may not be even feasible in many cases, but to the long term health and progress of the former cult member, how important is it that they reintegrate into the local church?
We always tell them, Ron, that the most difficult task you are going to face is working through what was good that you went through and what was bad, that you're going to have to, in a sense, kind of dismantle the theology that undergirded the group and fueled all of your abuse, and hold on to the good stuff and let go of the bad stuff. That is a very, very hard thing.
So there is good stuff? What kind of good stuff could there be?
You made good relationships, you made friendships, you experienced a level of fellowship that you don't often experience on the outside.
Maybe you learned how to give public talks.
Yeah, there's a lot of, you may have, a church like the Boston Church of Christ or International Churches of Christ, a lot of these organizations, they aggressively teach theology, and not all of it is wrong. So you can come out with a good understanding of the authority of scriptures and things of that sort, but to sort through, well, what is really healthy, what is really biblical, and what is not is daunting task. Okay. So it takes time for an individual to work through that. We tell them in terms of going, now this may sound heretical at this point, but with individuals that we have that we really believe are Christians, they've just been beat up so badly and they're afraid to go to a church. We say to them, look, Jesus speaks of God as being a how much more Father. in the Gospels. If you being evil wouldn't do such and such to your own children, how much less is he going to do this to you, in essence? And so we tell them, God understands what you have been through. And it's okay for you to take some time to work through some of these issues with people that you trust than to immediately thrust yourself back into the life of a church. Because that sometimes does not work well. It's too triggering, and they need to work through some of these issues, like authority and hearing Bible verses that were used to enslave them versus to free them. And so we sometimes will tell individuals, just wait a little bit. It's okay. God's not going to beat you up or throw you out of the kingdom because of that. Usually, too, from our experience, most people that come out of really destructive Christian groups, they church hop for a period of time.
Yeah.
They don't go somewhere and just stay there like they might if you'd never gone to a cult. And so we've worked with pastors and said, because pastors have said to us, well, what did I do wrong? Well, you might not have been doing anything wrong at all. You were doing everything right. It was them. They were just struggling with being involved in a church.
And I've seen some that never even try to go into a church. They just retreat into their own.
Sadly.
I'm going to do my own thing on Sunday morning, and I don't believe that I need to be part of a church. And they're still really, in many cases, they're holding on to some of the false teachings about the institutional church that they heard.
Absolutely.
Some leaders that we may not even consider spiritual abusive so dislike public accountability that they come out and they are looking for things in the Bible that would discourage you from trying to hold them accountable. I think one of our sponsors talks about this.
Yeah, but he's turned it into a very a productive, lucrative. Yeah, you can say lucrative pursuit. He took his anger and he channeled it. So, and World's End Theology Outlet is featuring his product this week, and they have a special announcement. Your spiritual rights are under attack. People who oppose your teaching are criticizing you by name in public. Are you looking for that one verse in Scripture that says, if you don't like them, kill them? Well, we have something even better. It's the Benny Hinn Holy Ghost machine gun, because you just don't have to take it anymore. The Benny Hinn Holy Ghost machine gun is fully automatic, so there's no waiting for results. It has high-capacity magazines, so you can wipe out every detractor. And its high-caliber rounds means that, as Benny Hinn himself said, you can blow their heads off. In the spirit, of course. Well, anyways. Okay, the Benny Hinn Holy Ghost machine gun, available at World's End Theology Outlet, your one-stop resource for half-baked heresies, dubious doctrines, and other ideas whose time has gone. So, we are back, and, freedom, liberty, spiritual liberty. All those of us who took history in school remember that it came at a cost. Political freedom, political liberty came at a significant cost. There was a battle that was fought. But what we're not often taught in our churches or any place else for that matter is that the same was true with spiritual liberty. It took a while, even during the Protestant Reformation and into the next century, to nail down what does it mean to be free spiritually. And so what I've done is I've come up with a couple of historic statements of the liberty of conscience that came out of the Protestant Reformation. And I showed these to you before the program. And the first one, it comes from a document called the Westminster Confession of Faith that was produced in 1647. And I just love what it says. God alone is Lord of the conscience and hath left it free from the doctrines and commandments of men, which are in anything contrary to his word, or beside it in matters of faith or worship. The ironic thing is a lot of times the cult leaders will tell you, oh, well, you've been following the teachings of men. But what do? They substitute their own teachings of men. They give them theirs instead of the ones they claim you were believing. So that to believe such doctrines or to obey such commands out of conscience is to betray true liberty of conscience. and the requiring of an implicit faith and an absolute blind obedience, which, of course, that's what we did. You know, they would tell us, the leader would say, this wasn't supposed to be about blind obedience, and yet everything he did encouraged exactly that.
Right.
And to do that is to destroy liberty of conscience and reason also. Now, during that same century, this statement was adopted by two other groups of Christians. The Savoy Declaration, those were the Congregationalists. The Westminster Confession, by the way, is largely Presbyterian, although others have followed it. Savoy Declaration is Congregationalist. Of course, Second London Baptist Confession means they were Baptists. They didn't change it hardly at all. The words in yellow there, how the Congregationalists and Baptists adapted it, they just shortened it a little bit, means the same thing. But what I'd like to do is camp out on this phrase, implicit faith, because this was a specific phrase, a term that was used in the Middle Ages by the Catholic Church. It was a doctrine, the doctrine of implicit faith. And what it meant was you were required to believe whatever the church taught, even if A, you didn't understand it, or B, you hadn't even heard it yet. You were just required to assume that whatever the church taught you was true and accurate. And now they're coming out in the wake of the Reformation. They're saying this is unbiblical. This is wrong. You should never assume your leaders are presenting you what the Word of God says faithfully. You should check them. You should compare what they're saying to the Scriptures. You're not required. In fact, if you do have implicit faith, that's a bad thing. It's not a good thing. And this was a hard-fought spiritual freedom that was won. And yet, when you look at all of these cults, all of these spiritually abusive groups that have evangelical statements of faith, they're repeating the same error.
Absolutely.
From the Middle Ages. They're requiring their people to just one of the things that my leader would say, especially toward the beginning, he would say, if somebody was having problems with something he was saying, he would say, well, you just don't have faith for that yet. But you can borrow my faith.
You can borrow my faith.
And he was talking about borrowing his faith. And so you borrowed his faith so that you basically, it was really just a way of believing him, even if you didn't understand it.
Right.
And it didn't make sense to you. In other words, it was implicit faith.
Yeah. It's you know what the way that we've often put it is it's a total package. You can't say, well, I agree with doctrinal points 1 through 80, but 81 through 100, I don't agree with at all. I don't like those. You just can't do that. It's a whole package. You either take the whole thing or you got nothing.
Right. So, and some groups are overt about it, where others use guilt and fear and manipulation. Jehovah's Witnesses, for example, in the 1980s, when they had people who had actively engaged in Bible study without watchtowers and started coming to a belief other than watchtower, did a series of articles, Avoid Independent Thinking. Once we've told you what to think, that's all you need to know. Strangely, it says there are those who think they can study the Bible alone or in small groups, but such Bible reading has caused them to revert back to the doctrines pagan Christendom taught 100 years ago. Well, I have to ask a question. If you read the Bible alone and you start believing what the church has taught 4,000 years, what do you suppose the Bible teaches?
Yeah, exactly.
But then you have less direct. Ron's talked about this a little bit with his group. I grew up as an atheist, so I came to the church sort of untainted by some of this. But the first church we went to was I won't say what kind it was, very legalistic, let's say. The pastor would regularly, he would get up and he would do a sermon about men with long hair. Well, it happened I had long hair at the time. So he had him over and said, are you talking to me? No, just the Lord really wanted me to teach on this. And then the next week it was about, women who wear pantsuits. And, my wife wears jeans. So we'd have them over on Tuesday night for dinner. Where you talking? No. But if you're being convicted, And
By
then,
the way, when you had him over for dinner, did your wife decide to wear a skirt or a dress on that?
No, she did not. No. And then each Sunday they would have a list of, there are this many Christians in the world now, and all of them, as it happens, were just in this particular group's churches.
Yeah, gosh.
Right. So, but as I was telling Ron before you went on, you would have things like you must bring your tithe to the storehouse, and the storehouse happened to be that little church. And if you don't, God may break down your car, break down your washing machine, your roof is going to cave in, your kids are going to get acne, something bad is going to happen.
My kids already have acne.
Right. So you even get up off of your sick bed if it's Sunday morning because you don't want God to inflict some punishment on you. And if you didn't, and then something does happen during the week, automatically you have this mystical experience of,
yep, you connect the dots.
Right, yeah.
Well, that's pretty much exactly what Bill Gothard's approach was. You will have negative things happen to you that aren't even directly connected to the things that you're disobeying. So,
right.
So if you well, in one particular case, we adopted a child, and then we had financial problems. The business started failing. It wasn't because we were spending too much on the kid. It was just because the business started failing. But that was God's way of telling us we shouldn't have adopted the child. And so we gave it back to the agency. That literally happened.
Right.
And Gothard was okay with it.
Yeah.
So now you're going into, every church you go into is going, if they're preaching the word of God, they're going to speak with authority. And yet you've come out of a group that has abused authority. Every church that if it's being faithful, it's going to eventually, they're going to say something that'll make a sinner feel guilty. And yet you come out of a church that used that as a manipulative technique. Every church, at some point, you do need to draw a line with lifestyle. If by lifestyle you mean such things as, oh, it's okay to have an abortion, that's just part of my lifestyle.
Yeah.
Oh, it's okay to be, to practice same-sex marriage. That's just a lifestyle choice, or polygamy, or swinging, or whatever. How does a person avoid having a post-traumatic stress issue going into these churches? Does this happen with people trying to recover? Do they see any sign of authority as a big red flag?
That's a great question.
Yeah, often that's the case. That's why they don't, at least the people we've worked with a lot, that's why they don't just immediately go into a church, because they struggle with authority. And if it just smells like it's getting close to being something that's controlling, then I'm out of here. And they just don't want to deal with that. What was kind of interesting is, for us, probably 30% of the people we've had at Meadowhaven, maybe 25%, would inevitably at some point during the course of the year that they were with us come down, because we would meet with them 3 times a week formally, and they would sit with me and Judy, and they would look at me and they'd say, "You remind me of my cult leader." And I'd go, "Good, I'm glad."
Really?
Yeah, I go, I'm glad. One, because you feel comfortable enough and safe enough to tell me that. But then secondly, we can now work on that and deal with it. Because if you are out in the world and your boss reminds you of your cult leader at this point, then you can't go up to him and say that.
Right.
You're fired. So you're going to go from job to job to job, or from situation to situation, wherever you are triggered by what feels like to you to be a heavy-handedness.
Yeah.
So it was always a good thing, but that is a huge issue for individuals that come out of destructive groups. I'm not going to have somebody control my life again.
So, like, Harold Bussell writes this book, Unholy Devotion, Why the Cults Lure Christians. And the issue was, the thing he kept coming back to was familiarity. There was something in the cult that reminded him of something that was good in the church. It's just that when he got into the cult took it to such an extreme that it became bad.
Ron, you make a very good point, because generally what we find in individuals, when you look at just about any high control group, they take legitimate biblical principles, you needing to be involved with a body of believers, being a disciple, giving your time to present the gospel, whatever these things might be here, but they take them to an extreme that the Bible doesn't sanction. That's the difficulty. So they point to scripture and you go, oh yeah, that makes sense. I can see this. Yeah, I can see that this needs to be done. But you don't realize that it's being used now not to mentor you and to help you, but to enslave you to that organization.
And so then you've seen it used for however long you were in your group, your cult. You've seen it used only in this extreme fashion. It was used to put burdens on you, to pound you down, to keep you in submission to them, and to make you constantly feeling awful about yourself. And now you're trying to reintegrate into a church where these things are still there, but they're being used in their biblical way. But as soon as you hear them, you just kind of tighten up, you clench up, and you.
Absolutely.
It's like, oh no, they're going to do this. They're going to do this to me too.
Yep. Here we go again.
Right. It's like you're just trying to guilt trip me. So.
Very true.
So I do know people who every time they hear even the slightest indication that, one day, you know what, we're all going to be judged by God. It's just a fact of the Bible. Yeah. But as soon as they hear it, it's like, you're trying to threaten me the way the cult threatened me.
Yeah.
So how do they get through that? How do they deal with it?
It's a trigger. And this is what I was saying earlier about you've got to work through these issues. And that's when you get down to dealing with, well, what does the Bible really teach on this? So we would hammer home over and over and over again in various kinds of ways the grace of God, that God is not just waiting up there for you to do something wrong so he can take you behind the divine woodshed and beat the living daylights out of you. Here, this is a situation where
we talk about it like he's hovering up there with his thumb, waiting to squash you like a bug.
Yeah, exactly.
So it sounds like what you're saying is you try to restore the balance. The balance was taken away, and now we're restoring it.
But a big thing that, and this is where I think needs to be more places like Meadowhaven. Grace, I would contend, is more caught than it is taught.
Yes,
it's by being around others where you see this, where you feel it, where you live in it, and you experience it, that this then impacts your own life. So to just go, if you've come out of a really abusive group, to just go and even talk to somebody that knows what they're doing once a week for 45, 50 minutes, and then that's it, that is helpful by all means, but it's not, I don't think, as effective in the long run, or is as much of a allows you to heal more quickly than if you were in an environment where you can really see grace demonstrated.
I think a good model, someone who models what you're supposed to do and be, it's more comprehensive than a whole bunch of words on a page or a whole bunch of words coming out of my mouth. As I'm trying to instruct you in the way you should do and act and be and all that, I might miss something that you don't catch or you don't notice, or I just miss it because I didn't even know this was a gap in your knowledge.
Right.
But I had this happen when I had one of my earliest student teaching. I was teaching for a while, and when a seasoned teacher came into the room and took my curriculum and began teaching it, and fortunately she had designed the curriculum, so she knew what she was doing. Suddenly I saw like 20 things that I was doing wrong in terms not only of instruction, but classroom management. And these are things she wouldn't even have known to tell me because she didn't know that I wasn't doing them or doing them right.
Right.
And it's the same with, so she served as a model, and all of a sudden lights started going out of my head.
That's a great example.
I can do that. I can act that way. I can respond this way when the students are getting out of hand, instead of the way I was responding. So it's when we see the person in action, when we see the model, then and that's really what happens in cults too. We try to become like the leader. The members try to become like that person. They try to pattern themselves, their words, their attitudes, and their actions after the leader. Well, you need to give them a proper Christian model. Paul says, "Be followers of me as I am of Christ." And he was talking to people who'd met him. He was talking to people who had seen him in action.
Well, what's so damnable about these cults, these Christian groups that end up just grinding their members up in the process, is just exactly what you were saying. They leave the group, they either get kicked out or they walk away because they can't take it anymore. And but they know that they cannot go back to the group, but they've been effectively inoculated against the gospel or against going to church. So they're in nowhere land. So they have no one to really get together with on a regular basis in some kind of a worshipful fellowshipping mode and see that, because they don't trust.
Well, right. And before getting into a group like that, maybe they have been attending a church that, or at least represents itself as a church, that even may stand up and say something like, this is your Bible, but actually never teach anything from the Bible. It's just sort of a motivational speaker. Actually, we have a sponsor that talks about somebody just like that.
Yeah, he's really good at telling you, that the Bible has good stuff, and he's just not good at presenting the good stuff that's in the Bible. But you know what? Hey, he has a product also. World's End Theology Outlet is back, and they have a question for all of us. Are you still trying to figure out how to clean up in the ministry business? Do you want to finally learn how to get to the bottom of growing a successful church? Would you like to flush away your failures and start having your best church now? Well, then what you need is Charlatan Ultra Soft, because nothing says theologically soft like Joel Osteen and his Charlatan Ultra Soft. It was personally tested by the man himself. It provides comfort where it counts. It wipes away even the most stubborn orthodoxy and comes with a money-back guarantee. Keep those butts in the pews with Charlatan Ultra Soft, available at World's End Theology Outlet, your one-stop resource for half-baked heresies, dubious doctrines, and other ideas whose time is long, long gone. Gone. Yes. Tells you what you want to hear.
He does. And so if you end up getting recruited into a spiritual abusive group, thinking that you knew something about the Bible, then you don't. How do you trust anyone now? I mean, I went to a church. Why didn't I learn anything?
Right.
And I went to this group, and they told me what the Bible actually meant, but it turns out that isn't what it meant. How can I trust even my own ability to discern what's true versus what's not?
Yeah. Very, very difficult. Very difficult. And again, I think a lot of that is just through modeling. It's kind of like we used to tell the individuals who came to Meadow Haven, if they were coming in wanting to essentially deal with biblical things right off, we would say to them, you have to learn you have to heal to begin with at the very area where your deepest hurt is, and that's in trusting here at this point. So you start with, like it says in the Bible, you start with Jerusalem, then Judea, then Samaria, then to the uttermost parts of the earth. So you start with just a little area there, people that you can, and you work on that, and then you expand it more and more and more. But again, it's the whole mentoring thing.
Right. And that's really important. And leaders, I want to talk just for a moment to pastors. The really good pastors are going to already sort of be doing this. Others are going to wonder if we've gone off the deep end trying to tell them how to be pastors. But it seems to me the whole concept of church leadership is skewed, unfortunately, by guys like Bill Gothard that have this sort of top-down structure where the pastor is the boss, the elders are under him in terms of bossness, if there's such a thing, and you simply hear and obey. If the pastor says it, you just go, yes, sir, and you go and do it. Where Jesus sets up this model is diametrically opposed to that. He who would be great among you, he says, will be the servant of all. In other words, the higher you ascend into leadership, the more accountable you become to a greater number of people. It's not the other way around. And really good pastors live in glass houses, and everyone around them has Windex.
Right.
Right.
And I think that's why we have been seeing in recent months the Church Too movement, which is part of the Me Too. It's kind of spawned out of the Me Too movement. Right. What we see in every case is at some point, not at the same point in every case, but we see a lack of accountability on the part of the leaders. In other words, they're basically following a worldly pattern instead of the pattern that Christ laid out, where they're not really servants, but they're being served. So,
yeah,
the church exists for them, to serve them. I don't want to get into specifics. I don't want to get into individual.
Oh, and they may not always recognize it, but if someone tries to bring an issue and it is short-circuited in some way from actually being dealt with, that's probably a sign that the leadership is not being accountable. Unfortunately, it's going to become accountable at some point because, really people... one of the calls I get a lot, by the way, is the form of church government. What's the biblical form of church government? And frankly, we don't take a position on that. But the one thing I can tell everybody is that it almost doesn't matter, because if you are congregational government, the congregation has a big say in what's going on. You can become abusive of the pastor.
Sure.
If you're an elder-led congregation, you still get to vote because you vote with your nickels and your feet.
Yeah. That's why I definitely have a bias in terms of what the best form of church government is, but I'm not going to tell whatever, and I'm not going to mention it here because it's not appropriate. And what you just said, the only thing about cults, though, is it's extremely hard to vote with your feet.
Right.
Yeah,
that's the point. Right.
So one way you can tell you're in a cult, as opposed to a regular church, is, can I just leave and I will not be condemned? I will not be hounded. In my case, I went to a different church and he sent letters. My leader sent letters making all these accusations against me, which were unfounded. They were horrible. And I had to actually eventually, fortunately, I was fortunate. My new pastor personally knew my ex-group leader and knew that this guy wasn't right, that he had issues and he was not to be trusted. He had bad experiences with him. And so but a lot of times the pastor has no clue. So if it had been a totally different pastor who'd gotten a letter from my former leader accusing me of all these sins and vices and whatnot, it would have been a horrendous experience for me. So that's part of what making it difficult to leave is all about. You're going to pay a price. If they will come and they will follow you sometimes and track you down and make it hard for you.
They do. Now, we did get one question emailed to me from somebody, and it was about Internet IBLP, Institute in Basic Life Principles, Bill Gothard's group. And the question was, do you find it common that people coming out of this movement have a lot of trouble with societal norms? I'm not going to answer that one. I can't answer that, but I'll let you guys weigh in on that.
Well, I have a lot of problem with societal norms lately. When you look at where we're going as a society, societal norms are changing very rapidly. But if by societal norms you mean can I enjoy watching television? Is it okay to enjoy secular music? Sometimes, yeah. They've been trained against that kind of a thing. It used to be you used to be able to say that lifestyle issues, for the most part, were neutral. Even when it came to, should I get a tattoo? Now I know we're going to probably get letters when I say this, but I don't want a tattoo. I'm never going to have a tattoo, but I'm not going to judge anybody who gets a tattoo, depending on what the tattoo says. If it says something obscene or blasphemous, I might have a problem with that. Just having the tattoo is a lifestyle choice. There are a whole host of issues that are simply neutral lifestyle choices that used to be considered, you used to be sinning if you did them. in evangelicalism as a whole. And I think that was part of the problem that kind of fed the cults, is that there was enough legalism in the church, the broader church, that it made the legalism of the cults familiar and less of a red flag.
Well, I think egregious, right? Yeah, right. Yeah.
I think a big factor in it too is that what makes someone like Gothard so appealing is that our culture has been devolving for decades.
Right.
And you've got someone that comes along who's a good speaker, who knows his Bible, and makes everything black and white, eliminates all the gray areas that are part and parcel of what it is to live in this world of sin. So he makes it all very clear, and as long as you stay within the rails, you are a righteous man.
Not only righteous, but protected. You're under the umbrella, and you're protected. Now, here's the consequence. The question is, do you have trouble adjusting to societal norms?
Sure.
Right? From time to time, I'll get a phone call or an email. Somebody's requesting help for someone they're trying to assist. About 5 or 6 years ago, I was contacted by someone in California that was counseling a woman who was in her 40s, had never held a job because she lives under her father's umbrella of protection.
Yep.
Never worked outside the house, never had a bank account, never even chose her own clothes because she was under her father's umbrella of protection. And they were trying to figure out, how do I help this person? And they had no familiarity with Bill Gothard. And as they started walking them through what he teaches, it's a light went on. She went, now I understand what she just doesn't even know what it's like to live in the United States.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So where you were going was what I was thinking in terms of, if I were coming out of IBLP or ATI, what would be the kind of societal norm I'd have difficulty adjusting to? And it would be just the way especially the way we deal with male-female relationships, dating, court, they want, and family relationships. They have a whole, it's kind of like if there's ever a place where they're really cultish, it is in this area of what you were just pointing out. I have to have my parents' permission to do anything until I get married. This goes beyond patriarchalism. This goes
absolutely.
This is like way, way off to the right. So a societal norm would be my kid, who, by the way, hasn't gone on a date yet, girls, and I'll give you his phone number at the end of the show. He's 20 now. So I'd like to see him, do that. Just a normal, go out for a soda, and ice cream. And, he hasn't, but is he free as far as I'm concerned, as a Christian father who's pretty conservative on all these issues? Yes, he doesn't have to get my permission. I would like to know, I'd like to meet the girl and so on. I want her to be a Christian. Is he okay? Is it okay to date? Is it okay to just to have a normal relationship, the kind I had before I married my wife? And I was going to a Bible college where they taught the scriptures, and nobody ever said, wait a minute, did you give, you should only be doing it this way, the way that this particular teacher says to do it, which means you have to meet her father even before you ask her out. And then the first date is going to be dinner at her house with her parents,
Well, gentlemen, what Christians have struggled with, I would contend, from almost the very beginning, and it has spawned cults all down through history, destructive groups, is what does it mean to be in the world but not of it?
Yes.
We're always trying to define that. And so you've got a Gothard that comes along and defines it. You've got an Albert Eugene Spriggs and the 12 Tribes that defines it. You've got all these individuals that define it here.
And it gets defined in terms of externals instead of internals. What we do on the outside instead of what we're doing in our hearts. Are we obeying God from the heart? And if I'm obeying God from the heart, if I'm an 18, 19, 20-year-old and I take a girl on a date and both of us are obeying God from the heart, you don't have to worry about what's going to happen on that date.
Exactly. Right. There was a really good book written back in the 1920s by a man named Richard Niebuhr called Christ and Culture, where he talks about this very thing. And he talks about the 4 different views that Christians have had towards that whole concept of what does it mean to be in the world but not of it.
Mm-hmm. And it's it's been revisited. I think, in fact, there was a book, Christ and Culture Revisited by D.A. Carson. And so
yes,
it's something that
excellent.
Caused a lot of people to think seriously. And so what you have in many cults is what Niebuhr called the Christ against culture view.
Exactly. They're radically against culture.
Radically against culture. If it's so, like when the web was new, I visited some Christian relatives of mine who were in IBLP. They're ATF homeschoolers, the whole shebang. And I was working at Wheaton College, where I just gotten a web connection at my desk. And hardly anybody had the web yet. I had an Ethernet cable to the web. And back when there was hardly anything on the web to even look at. And, no one had ever even heard of Amazon yet. And what's a search engine? Well, anyways. Right. But there was there was a lot of interesting stuff, a lot of it Christian. And my relative, my Gothardite relative, he was really suspicious. I don't know. He says, "Are you sure about this?" Because it was part of the world. It was part of the culture. He was not ready. Anything that was out there that remotely looked like television, which you could argue kind of it had a screen, So so it was Christ against culture is still the Gothardite worldview.
Yeah, exactly. And it is for most destructive groups. They define what it means to be a follower of Christ.
And we're not saying the culture is godly. We're saying is that just because it's part of the culture doesn't necessarily mean it's anti-God. And you've got to realize that even now, as low as it is sunk, and it is sunk very low,
yes,
that there's still a Christian presence in the culture, and God is still at work using His common grace to keep it from being as bad as it can be. There is still good in the culture.
Well, guys, we are past the end of our time. This happens to us often because we get involved in what we're doing. Fortunately, we don't have actual paid sponsors, so we can do that.
But you can go to MidwestOutreach.org, click the yellow donate button. And
you could click the yellow donate button. That doesn't mean we get off any sooner, but we might think about it. Yes. I do want to again point out Bob's conference is coming up in October, right? October something?
Yes, October 26th and 27th.
October 26th and 27th. And so Recovering from Spiritual Abuse, co-sponsored by Meadow Haven. And if you
International Cultic Studies Association as well.
If you're in that area, you might want to check that out. There we go. Ron, do you want to take a few minutes and walk us out of here?
I'd be most pleased to do that. Our resident cult leader profiler is Neil before me. Our wardrobe manager is See How It Fits You. Our tinfoil hat provisioner is Just In Case. Our Jehovah's Witnesses coverage comes from Armageddon and D. Opposer. Our Mormon archives manager is Polygamus. Our liberal denominations bureau chief is Lucy Goosey. Our transgender issues coverage comes from Ben Hur. Our special correspondent for cults based on the Hindenburg disaster and flying turkeys is Ode to Humanity. Our fact-checking supervisor is Yoleg Pulling. Our technical assistance comes through Murky Research. Our legal advisors are at the law firm of Dewey, Cheatham, and Howe. Our grievance resolutions director is Yvonne Pisami. Our director of privacy assurance is Wiretapping. And our original idea sourcing comes from Drew Blank. The Unknown Webcast is a production of Midwest Christian Outreach, Inc., in cooperation with Emergency Manicure Productions, which are both solely responsible for its content, but you will never be able to prove that in a court of law. Not that we're dragged into court over that. We'll wait in line. So,
you won't even be able to prove it on a tennis court, actually.
Right.
All right, guys, it's been good. I think it's been a good, productive show, and I thank you, Bob Pardon, for being with us.
It's been a privilege.
And we will have you again in the future, and you will know you have been had.
Yes.
Amen.
Adios.
Thank you.